welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm Aaron Brightman, coming to you Wednesday morning, July 24th. Wanted to focus on Big Ten Media Days, Rutgers making its appearance at the first day of a 3-day event in Indianapolis. First, though, as always, this episode is brought by the Knights of the Raritan, the Rutgers NIL Collective. Click on the link in the description of this episode to join their free newsletter. They cover Rutgers athletics, as well as will give you a good idea of all the programming they have coming up this school year and ways to become a member to support Rutgers students with NIL. So Rutgers, Greg Schiano on center stage on Tuesday at the podium with this press conference was 11:45 a.m. on Tuesday. Also made a studio appearance with the BTN analysts. Jerry DiNardo was there, Howard Griffiths, also Jake Butt, friend of the podcast, been on a couple times, talk about his positivity towards Rutgers with Dave Revson. Also, and then the players that were in attendance, Kyle Monangai, Tyreem Powell, and Mohamed Toure, were on a panel discussion on BTN as well and represented really well. So these types of days typically don't yield a lot of breaking news or anything that we don't kind of already know. But what I like to look at in terms of these days is kind of the vibes. And I just thought that Greg Schiano oozed confidence, was very comfortable on stage and in his media interview with the BTN studio panel. And he has every right to be, right? And I think there has to be a certain satisfaction and confidence that comes with entering year 5 and having the program moving in the right direction. And they asked some questions like, about recruiting and what the difference has been in terms of obviously right now. And you can't speak specifically about unsigned recruits, but 2025 recruiting class trending very well right now for Rutgers. And we've talked at length about that. But he really touched on the fact that everything is better now than it was when he got there. And that's a great thing to promote. And it's true. When it's true, it's genuine, right? And in terms of what he inherited in December 2019 following the Ash era and where Rutgers is now, it is, and I had a podcast recently talking about this, it's what he was hired to do. And the fact is, he's doing the job that he was hired to do. And we now enter the 24 season with much higher expectations than Rutgers has had. And since they've entered the Big Ten, I think you saw that reflected in, I talked about on Monday's preview, how many national media would be asking him questions when he was at the podium. All the questions came from national media, from different websites and whatnot. There was certainly an interest level in Rutgers that isn't always the case. You saw Adam Rittenberg, longtime writer for ESPN, write a national story about Greg Schiano and using some of his quotes from Media Day on Tuesday. You saw Pete Thamel, who Schiano has had a long-time relationship with, do a 2-minute interview with him that was online. National media there. There's some other national articles. Matt Fortana is a national guy that wrote an article on Rutgers also. So to see that buzz was fun. You're seeing the change in perception. And Rutgers was a legitimate storyline on Tuesday. And you saw Jake Butt on the BTN studio. He tweeted about it. I quote tweeted. He went back and forth a little bit. Two things. He said that Rutgers was the most underrated team in the Big Ten. And he said that Kyle Monangai was the most underrated player in the conference. Kyle Monangai earning Big Ten honors on Tuesday. 12 players were listed as Big Ten preseason honors, and Kyle Monangai was one of the 12. Deservedly so, rightfully so. And I loved the way he talked and how he spoke at in his appearance on the BTN studio. Ashley Adamson did a great job. But Monangai is just so well-spoken, confident, and humble, and he just talked about staying in the moment, focusing on the day-to-day. And obviously that's the program message. And you're never going to get anything too out of step from Rutgers players. They're very well trained. in the Schiano way in terms of how to talk to media. But I think the biggest thing for me in terms of the takeaway, in terms of listening to Schiano multiple times, seeing the player interviews, was authenticity. This program is authentic. We've talked about the stability. We've talked about doing things the right way. It's obvious that that's the case. And I think the biggest takeaway in that authenticity is Schiano and the players both saying that this is a player-driven program now in terms of the leadership. And that's ultimately, that's what you want as a coach. That's the most successful programs when the players are motivating each other and keeping each other in line and keeping each other focused and driven at the ultimate goal. As a coach, that's all you can ask for. And that comes from culture. That comes from development. Schiano talking about being a developmental program once again on Tuesday. But I think the exciting thing and the reason for optimism is talking about the fruits of the labor, right? Bringing in guys in his initial couple of years. They're all seniors now. They're all fifth-year players now. You have so many veterans on this team. You have so many returning starters on this team. And it really does have a similar vibe to that 2006 era. And that puts pressure on this team. And I don't think the expectation should be a 9-0 start and a number 7 ranking, right? Which is what that team ultimately was at before ultimately finishing in the top 15 and winning the Texas Bowl. And certainly a disappointment for how that season started. But in terms of where this team is entering the season, everyone has the right to dream big. I don't think that should be the expectation. And if they don't win 10 games, the season is necessarily a disappointment. I think anything less than six wins would be a huge disappointment. But we've talked about, and I went through it on Monday with the preseason poll, and Rutgers picked 9th, and they're not playing any of the top 5 teams. There's a lot of 50-50 matchup games, and they could go either way. But this team has a chance to do something special and to be in the top third of the Big Ten and make some serious noise. And it was just fun to see that get a little traction on Tuesday, and some of the national media see that and recognize that. So that's just great press for the program. But at the end of the day, just in hearing everyone speak representing Rutgers, it should not be forgotten that it wasn't that long ago that there were a lot of reasons to be embarrassed and to be ashamed and to be down on Rutgers football. Not only how they were on the field, but how they represented off the field. Going back to the flood days, the Ash era on the field. And I think we'd be remiss to not acknowledge the fact that whatever happens this season, right now, the stability of this program, the way this program represents itself, the way the players represent itself, the way Schiano represents Rutgers, it's a really good thing. And it's a really positive thing. And it feels good. You know, they're easy to root for. And it wasn't always the case at Rutgers. And there wasn't a lot of hope in rooting for them. So no matter what happens this season, no matter what people's expectations are, and I did a poll recently, and I'll go through that closer to the season. I'll do another one comparatively, see if people are more optimistic as training camp coverage goes through, but which typically the case. But yes, you know, everyone hopes this team with this schedule, and that was part of the conversation with the media on Tuesday, was the schedule being favorable. There's no other Big Ten team that doesn't have to play one of the top 5 teams in the preseason poll. Talking about Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Michigan, Iowa. Rutgers misses them all. And you know what? They're due. They're due in terms of being in the Big Ten East for so long, playing Iowa so many years as well. Missing Oregon, the one Pac-12 school, former Pac-12 school that they do not play this year. Again, I don't think it's an easy schedule, but comparatively to the Big Ten, it's as good as it's ever going to look in terms of having a real opportunity to stockpile some wins. And when you have a veteran roster returning and you have some key strengths that you think you can build on and some obvious weaknesses that you've addressed, quarterback, wide receiver, Schiano touched on the wide receiver position, very confidently saying to the BTN studio analyst that he feels like that position will be, quote unquote, markedly better this year. Obviously added Demir Miller, Nassim Brantley's now eligible. Ian Strong in year 2. Some of the younger guys potentially emerging. Christian Dremel is back. So it was good to see his optimism there. He obviously spoke positively about Ethan Kaliakmanis as well. So it was all positive, as it should be on media days. But I think it's real. I think it's substantial. I don't think it's fluff. And I think everyone just came across very genuine and authentic in terms of the vibes. I thought the players, it just, you can feel that they understand the moment and that they're connected. The 3 guys they had up there, I love Toure, Powell, and Monangai. They just seem very appreciative of where this program is now. They deserve a lot of credit for moving the program forward. And also, I think it's very clear they recognize what's at stake and the opportunity in front of them. And I think, again, going back to whatever does happen ultimately, I don't think it would be, if they don't win as many games as everyone hopes and they hope, it won't be for a lack of drive. It won't be for a lack of effort. It won't be for a lack of not doing the right thing. It's going to come down to execution. And having a team that is connected and player driven and focused on the ultimate goal is a great way to go into the season. You have to stay healthy, but I just really like the vibes that you got from this team from Schiano on Tuesday. Another bit of news Schiano made in terms of talking to the beat writers, Brian Franseca and Pat Lanning from NJ.com, asked about the practice facility, saying that, there's basically not close in terms of funding. He said something to the effect of, if a big donor wants to step up, great. But he did reiterate that his focus is NIL and that things have changed since he was hired. And you have to have players to win. And if you don't win, you don't have a facility to worry about because you're not going to be there. So I thought that was telling. I know there's been some reports out there that they're working on it, that there's been some blueprints out there. And, I think it ultimately happens. And Schiano said he wanted it to, but I think it just shows how quickly things have changed. He talked about on Tuesday how quickly the climate has changed in college football and obviously college sports in general. And I think we've seen with player retention, with recruiting, Rutgers is trying to be as competitive as possible with NIL. And that's why you should join Knights of the Raritan and become a member and help Rutgers football with NIL, as Rutgers football certainly needs to continue to grow and build with NIL. And then lastly, just in terms of Schiano talking about the NFL pipeline and how he feels that's helped recruiting and just adds credibility. And he talked about when Rutgers has been at its best when he's been coach, they've had multiple NFL players, and that's what he feels like he has on this team. And that was encouraging to hear. He also highlighted, Max Melton not being a high recruit, and he was number 22 in the state and got drafted 43rd overall. That was a good point to emphasize. And obviously, that's resonating on the recruiting trail, right? They're seeing a program with stability. They're seeing a program producing pros. And that will be key, not only how this team performs on the field, but how many NFL players they generate in future years from this team. And we look back, at other teams in 2012, they had 7 draft picks, and 2013, I can't remember which year. It was 2012. They had 7 draft picks. That's the type of stuff that changes perception. He mentioned that before he left, they were top 15 nationally in terms of pros as alums, in terms of all college football programs, and Rutgers is inching towards that. A long way to go to get back to that. But this team was made for this moment in terms of player development. It's all coming to a head this year. And it just seems like they are well positioned from a mental standpoint, from an attitude standpoint, from a resources standpoint. I did love that Schiano talked about alignment with President Holloway and the Board of Governors, everyone moving towards the same direction and being most aligned he's ever seen since being at Rutgers. So that was really encouraging as well. There's just a lot of things moving in the right direction together, and that could create the perfect storm. So obviously you can have reasons for optimism leaving Big Ten Media Days, but I thought those were some key points to think about. And to note, he mentioned in his BTN interview that players are reporting on Sunday. Training camp will start next week. No official dates released yet by the program, but we'll get that soon. Just a very exciting time rooting for Rutgers sports and rooting for Rutgers football. And Big Ten Media Days kicked it off on Tuesday. Again, picked ninth in the conference. Think it's fair. Think they can do better than that. Talked about that at length. If you didn't see Monday's episode, check that out. Tuesday, I did an episode on Rutgers backcourt, Dylan Harper, Jeremiah Williams. A lot of chatter lately in terms of best backcourt. I was surprised. I've seen some social media on Tuesday, people talking about, maybe they're top 5, maybe they're top 3. Dylan Harper and Jeremiah Williams, you can watch my episode, listen to my episode. I'm very big on the fact that if they can reach their potential, and I highlight certain things they need to do, Rutgers basketball can prosper from the two of them becoming the players I think they can and being the best backcourt in the Big Ten. I do think it's possible. So check those episodes out. Thanks for listening and watching this episode. We'll have more later this week, and have a great day. Talk to you soon.